Joseph Campbell, when he was talking about myths and stories, he has this wonderful quote that he says, myths are, that dreams are private myths and myths are public dreams. And so there's something really connected between this experience of dreaming and this co-dreaming together that creates our society. And dreams happen when we are in our most relaxed, unplugged state of mind, when we really let go. And we tend to leave our rational brains at this point and get into our creative space. And that's where dreams come from. And that's where all the great stories come from as well, as that side of our brain. And yet, when we get stressed and nervous, our rational brain takes over. And we start speaking in these rational terms. And there's two reasons to be really stressed and nervous right now. One, we're tackling the most giant thing ever. We're trying to shift society with just the 25 of us here, trying to change the world in a couple of years. And two, we only have 2 days to do it. So that's going to make that rational brain start really kind of taking over. So what I really want to do is have everybody just agree with each other, but also agree with yourselves that we're going to have fun. And that we're going to this is not just for the sake of having fun, but this is so that we can actually succeed and be creative. And so when we go through these exercises, take risks. Be funny, laugh, and let go, and don't get so focused on whether we will or will not save the world by the end of this workshop. That's where the best work's going to come from. So hopefully everyone can just sort of agree to that, and if any of you can't, we'll know, you'll really stand out. Okay, now I want to kind of give you the outlines of what we're going to do over the next couple days. And this is the last time I think that I'll be sort of standing up and just lecturing for any amount of time. It's all going to be collaborative workshopping. What I really hope that you'll take away is two things. One, and this you will definitely take away, is a methodology for generating stories and story-based campaigns. There's no doubt that you'll learn this through this process, and it's a methodology that I believe, over using it for the last 13 years, really, really works. Creates the kinds of campaigns that I've been really proud to be part of, like Story of Stuff, and like the new detox campaign that just came out and is doing great. I think that this can really unlock what we're all looking for, which is more emotional, more evocative, and more consistent story-based campaigns. So you will learn that through this process, and I hope you'll find that it's interesting and useful for your own work. But two, I hope we'll also start collaborating on what I can't help but call a brand. I'm a social change person who never thought I'd get into marketing and branding, but that's where I found myself because that's how I've been able to help organizations change the world. We're really, I believe, working on a brand together where we can then take it, build it, continue to build upon it, and then check out whether our organizations are participating in the building of that larger story or transactionally running campaigns that somehow take away from it. And we can all see ourselves as part of something larger. That's what the outputs will be, I think, that we won't take it together on a personal level, but on a collective level. So in some ways, we're trying to create those private dreams for ourselves, those learnings that we can take for our own campaigns, but also that public myth that we can all share together and build off of, and hopefully have some seeds of that by the end of this. Sound good? Any questions? Cool. Okay. And so stop me at any point when you have questions. So I'm going to assume that you guys did the reading, but I'm also going to assume that maybe one or two of you didn't. So I'm going to go somewhere in between, going over a couple things as if you don't know, but I'll assume you do. All right. So two main things I want to cover is one, this what Michael was talking about with the digital era. So there's this concept that I have that the world of communications is changing, and we're not changing quickly enough with it. Because human beings, for 99% and 99.9% of our history, communicated in a very particular way that we can be leveraging now, but we haven't been. And that's called the oral tradition. So before we had writing and broadcast machines, we had this oral tradition societies. And ideas were passed from person to person. It's a survival of the fittest landscape. If an idea is not compelling, it sort of dissipates and dies. Transmission is not one to many, but many to many. They go through social networks and webs. Everyone owns ideas. Everyone mutates them. And this is how our brains developed and our societies developed to interact. And then this was deeply interrupted by the broadcast era, which lasted for about 100 years. And that's where you have these very expensive and elite machines that only a few people have access to. And if you get access, you can reach millions of people. And it's not survival of the fittest, it becomes survival of the richest now, right? If you can buy the space, you get the access. Your audiences don't own the ideas. They just consume them. And we start to think of our audiences not as partners, but really as consumers. And this is how we communicate. We've all grown up in this era. And even though we're not Madison Avenue advertisers, the way that organizations speak to people is in the way that we've learned from these kind of machines. And I talk about the sort of deadly sins that come out of this, but one of them is vanity. We tend to talk about ourselves rather than our audience. Authority. It used to be that if you could buy the TV time, everyone would just believe you, so you could just spout facts and people would sort of nod and say yes. We still are hopelessly mired in this broadcast model of communication, and we need to get out of it. Because the broadcast era, not only do we not have enough money to buy broadcast, which is a big problem, but also the broadcast era is ending, and what's happening? Well, we're going back to the oral tradition again. But the only difference is that where it used to take millennia for an idea to travel around the globe, now it just takes a few seconds. But otherwise, it's the same. It's survival of the fittest again. People only consume information that comes from trusted sources, from their social networks. So even if you can buy broadcast, people know how to skip it and don't believe it. But if it comes from a friend, if it gets passed along, if it's been commented on, rated, mashed up by the people that they know and trust, they're going to listen. And that's why I call this new era the digital era. And we need new tools to communicate in this digital era. And so we should ask ourselves what works in oral traditions. And of course, the answer to that is in the survival of the fittest landscape of the oral tradition, only one kind of communication has ever worked, and that's stories. Right? So from societies that didn't have writing, all that's left are pottery shards and the stories they told. So this is an easy call to action. Let's start telling stories again and working in the oral tradition. In that oral tradition as well, we're not going to be creating these 30-second perfect little stories that we own and no one else gets to touch. We're going to be creating these grand narratives that everybody gets to participate in. So in a sense, a brand itself has to be a story starring you, your organization, your community, and your audiences. Because if you just say a story is just something that I put in a bottle, well, that bottle's going to get broken and it's going to get left behind as everybody wants to participate, but they can't. So we need to see ourselves not just creating stories, but creating this great transition brand, if you will, as a grand story itself. So that's kind of part one. I'm going to now tell you how we do that. Before I do, any questions? Okay. I speak quickly, even for native speakers of English, so just definitely make some kind of signal if you want me to slow down. I will. Okay, so how do we build this out? First thing to understand is how a story works. So, and this is the simple model for a story that I like to work with. We all know stories. We've all been told stories since we're 2 years old. We all love stories. We respond to them. And actually, you know what? I want to talk to you guys about one more quick thing before I go into the story model. Sorry about that. Not only are stories really important, but there's a certain kind of story, the myth, that matters the most in society. And anthropologists say that every society we know of was glued together by the stories they told. It tells us who we are, what's important, how we should behave. They're kind of like cultural DNA, these little packets of information that enter our consciousness and help us make all of our decisions in this complicated world. And great stories that rise to the level of myth combine 4 key factors in these neat packages. First, explanation. They tell us how the world works. 2, they attach some kind of meaning to it. So it's not just a description of the world, but also how I can apply that in my own life. What does that mean for my identity and who I am? 3, story. They don't take place right here or around the corner. They take place long ago and far away. They're these symbolic, creative ways of communicating. And 4, they give us rituals, ways of enacting those stories in our own lives. And every society we know of has had these universal stories in order to guide them. You can find them across all times. In our world today, of course, those universal stories are harder and harder to come by. So many of them are fraying. But because stories build societies, the people who can create these new myths actually will run the world. And I believe that's already happening because in the 1950s, when all of these myths had been crumbling, marketers came along and they started telling stories instead of just spouting the facts about their products. And they started giving us these 4 things again for the first time. So like, if you take the Marlboro Man, for instance, who's the most iconic marketing story of all time, it's a new explanation. It's a filtered cigarette for men. The first time they had done that, they wanted to explain that the world works differently now. But not only that, if you smoke this cigarette, you're going to be this rugged frontiersman cowboy. Story, no one's being rational about this. We know this guy is not real, but it doesn't matter. We symbolically want to be like him. And then ritual, it's an easy way to be a part of this story. We could just go to the corner store and buy a pack of cigarettes. So the question is, were marketers actually able to change society or just sell products? Well, I mean, I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys that, this consumer society that was built at that time, in one generation, we went from a sort of saving, thrift, Puritan work ethic society into this people who were based on consumption. Our world is based on consumption. So in one generation, they completely shifted the meaning of life through these myths. And that's bad news, but I think it's really good news because we could potentially do that again now that we have the tools. So, all right, any questions about myths? All right, cool. Now I'm going to show you how we'll make them. So here's how a story works. We all know stories. We've all been told them since we were little kids. We all go see movies, read books, and they work something like this. On the surface of the story, you'll find the characters, the conflict, the plot. Sorry, I can't really draw very well on the fly. But here's a little world. And if you've gone to the movies or if your 2-year-old has heard a story, they can recount the surface of the story for you. Anyone can see it, and anyone who has a memory can recount what just happened. But what's on the surface hides something very important and deeper. Every single element is placed here not because it's sort of crossed the storyteller's point of view. He's like, ooh, a squirrel, ooh, a cat. They were saying this is all placed here strategically to illustrate what the moral of the story is, that core truth about how the world works. And that core truth should be something that resonates with people on a deep level, but also it extends their knowledge of how the world works. So it's like they hear it and they say, yes, and I learned something from it. And that's why we care to repeat stories, and that's why we listen so eagerly to stories, because they tell us how the world works, right? But even deeper than that, stories are based on core values. I could tell you a story, and the moral is, he who hesitates is lost. It's a common story, and then I value something. I value risk and adventure and reward, and I am replicating my values by telling you that story. If I say, hey, go take a risk, that doesn't do anything. If I tell you a really exciting story about how risk led to reward, you may pick up those values too. And so we're building a shared culture, we're building society by telling these stories. An opposite moral of the story may be better safe than sorry, which means I value different things and I want you to value them too, safety and security. So the values really inform what the story is and make this whole thing relevant. So if we want to be part of this, if we want to attach ourselves to the story, it's because we share these values. Too often, we learn from the broadcast era to talk to people on these levels of we base our stories on these extrinsic values. If you don't do this, you won't fit in. If you don't do this, the world's going to end. If you don't do this, you will be ridiculed. And there's every it's called inadequacy marketing, basically. Like either be part of our story or suffer the consequences. But there are better ways to do it, which is what I call empowerment marketing, which is what all stories have been based on in the past, which is really calling people to citizenship, calling people to their intrinsic values, to their higher values. And in the book, and if you did the reading, you'll see that even in the corporate world, those stories that call us to our higher values tend to get passed around and be preferred by people. So even though we think we need to threaten our audiences and be the experts and tell them what to do, the best, most iconic campaigns always speak to people's higher level values. So this is a basic map of a story. If we can align every communication in about the Great Transition around some core truth about how the world works and understand what values we're trying to connect with in our audiences, we can build the foundations of a story. But we can also do a bunch more. There's more parts to this map. We can start working on the surface as well. And that's where I use the hero's journey model. So Joseph Campbell studied all these stories across as many times as he could, and he was looking for that common theme, that one thread that ran through all of them. And he believed he found this single story. It's the story of the hero's journey that cuts across all cultures. Not everybody believes that it's literally true that all cultures tell this story, but it's a very powerful model. When George Lucas got stuck trying to write Star Wars, he literally called Joseph Campbell and was like, help me do this. And so Joseph Campbell just told him how to map his story to the hero's journey, and of course the results were successful. And so here's how the hero's journey works. You have this helpless outsider living in a broken world. So the hero is usually an orphan, an old person, a slave, someone who's really on the outside. And they see that their world is broken, but they're the least likely person to be able to fix it. And when I say the world is broken, it often means that they have deeper values that they are trying to live out but really can't because the world is under some kind of oppression or pressure. In the story of Moses, for instance, Moses is in exile. He killed someone in Egypt because he believed in justice so much. But then he ran away and became the shepherd, and now he's 80 years old, and he's still kind of haunted by this experience in Egypt, but he can't do anything about it because the Pharaoh is so powerful. And then a mentor comes on the scene. Someone tells the hero that so much more is possible, that they can actually heal this world. And they give them this magic gift, something that makes the journey seem possible, and says, go into this magic world, confront the brokenness, and you will become a hero. And the hero says, no, I can't do it, that's not me. But the mentor is so powerful in their persuasion because they create a true human connection and reconnect that hero to remind them of their values. And they go back and they go and fight this dragon and have this great adventure in this exciting world that's totally different than their regular world. And what they get is a great treasure, but not the kind of treasure that we usually talk about, not money or gold or riches. They get something that they can use to heal the world. And Campbell said that we love these stories because these are the stories that we tell as initiations. These are the stories that help the teenager become the adult. These are the stories, to be a hero is to be a contributor to society, and we needed these stories to teach us how to move past selfish concerns into community. And that's why every society had these stories and still loves them. And this is why, even in this extrinsic value world we live in, Avatar is the most popular movie of all time. We sort of love all this consumerism, and also we get that there's something hugely missing, even for those people who are pretty asleep to the whole thing. The stories that we keep telling are about becoming a hero and helping to heal the world. So we can use these lessons as well to finish out the strategy for our brand. First of all, the hero of these stories is always the helpless outsider, and not the expert or the person who knows everything about how to heal the world. So that tells us that the hero of these stories that we tell really can't be us, can't be the experts, can't be the insiders. The hero has to be our audiences. We need to tell stories oriented to our audience as hero. So if we're not the hero, who are we? Well, we're the mentor. We're the person who calls people onto this journey of self-discovery. And to do that, we need to create a human connection. We can't just boom at them in the voice of God. We need to have a real personality that they can relate to, that makes them feel that they are being called by another human being that they can have a relationship with. And we need to give them some kind of magic gift, something that makes them feel like, oh, you're not just asking me to change the world, you're really sending me on my way with something great, something that I can be part of and I want to be part of. If we can define what the hero of our story really looks like and who they are, and get into an empathetic place with them, figure out what our voice is as mentor, and know what our gift is, then we have a 5-part brand strategy that we can then use to align all our communications. And everything that we then create on the surface, from a short tweet to a whole 90-minute documentary, can be aligned to this brand that we will all share. And this process is a lot of fun. So I think I will stop there in a moment, but I want to know if there's any questions about this model. No? Yeah.
Many of us are coming from CSOs, NGOs context. Isn't it quite frustrating that you're telling us you're not the hero? I think
you're a good person.
No, but it's, I mean, because for later stage to see it in a serious way, I think it's important to address exactly that point, because many people who are working in CSOs, for example, have strong drivers motivations, and it's very important for the later translation, I would say, into how to change your organization, how to do other things. Very, very important to take that exactly into account. It's changing already a bit my, let's say, my mindset in trying to translate it into practice.
And I think that one thing, luckily, is that we've anticipated that somewhat in that one of the core audiences for this thing that we're creating is going to be the CSO person working within a CSO who we are trying to get to participate in this larger thing. So CSO employees will be a hero in this, but yeah, it is hard to not think of yourself as a hero. Yeah.
I mean, it's also nested, isn't it, Jonah? Because we are heroes in a different story. We are heroes in a story where we had a mentor at some time who gave us that gift, and that's why we're struggling to do what we're trying to do. So in a sense, if we are a CSO person to start with, there's a reason for that. And that reason is our own story.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge is now to get out of our story and to create stories for others.
Yeah, yeah.
In that story.
That's right.
Embedded.
That's right. And telling your own story becomes telling your own story cannot be an obsession. It's actually an important thing that actually has to get done. And in the great stories of the past, the mentor always does have that interesting backstory as well. So every hero becomes a mentor, and every mentor was once a hero, and it's a chain of, and that's part of the process of initiation. So yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
As a CSOs, I see it as agents of change. So somehow this fully fits into the mentor role somehow. Is that we don't have the change in our hands. We want the change to happen, so facilitating that process. And I connected quite closely with my own work in terms of advocacy, so trying to influence, trying to be that agent of change, so the change is taken by someone else. Somehow that's the process.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that really struck me as I was reading the book in terms of thinking about this is that while the hero journey is a really iconic thing in most societies, fairy tales are as well. And fairy tales are a lot scarier, and sometimes the solutions are always more ambiguous than in hero's journeys.
Yeah.
And I think certainly from experience limited experience in Eastern European literature, and that tends to be a bigger driving force, whereas the kind of hero's journey tends to be in pioneer cultures and frontier cultures like America tends to be like the biggest driving force. And wonder if you could say a little bit about maybe, it's something that I'm interested in exploring, but any perspectives that you have of how we could tap into the kind of root of fairy tales as well as tapping into the root of hero's journey.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of mythologists kind of make a line between folklore and mythology because the ambiguous nature of folklore makes it hard for people to live their lives by it. A lot of folklore was created to basically warn people not to leave the village or something like that, the world is dangerous. But beyond that, it's often quite ambiguous, the outcomes, and as you're saying. And so the stories become very important as entertainment, but they were less about building culture than the grand mythological narratives, which Campbell said were based on this, which is not entirely true that they were all based on this. I believe that with folklore, when you have these common reference points that a society shares, you can leverage them by evoking them. But I think that the problem with basing like a whole strategy on a more folklore approach to me is that they are not as prescriptive about how do we actually go and change the world. They are more experiences of the unknown. So that's how I see them as different. So what are we going to do with all this? Well, we're going to go through a process basically of looking at this broken world. So our hero sees the world as broken because old explanations are no longer making sense. The old ways that they've been promised will lead to happiness are not working for us anymore, or lead to the success we're looking for are not working. And what we're going to do first as a group is we're going to concentrate on these myth gaps for a little bit to talk about how our hero sees the world as broken. And so what I want us to do before we get to that is to figure out what hero we are representing here. And we've identified two kinds of heroes. Where did we land on this? What are we calling them? The confused? Citizen? The disoriented citizen. The disoriented citizen. This is not someone who is just, thinks that we live in the most golden age of all time and they love the fact that they can get everything they need at their fingertips. This is somebody who has a sense that this is not working anymore for whatever reason, and is someone who feels a sense of dis-ease but doesn't know what to do to be part of something better. So there's the disoriented citizen, and then there's the CSO, change agent. Yeah, someone who is working hard to make change already, has committed their professional life, if not their life, to change, but is also feeling the change is too incremental and slow, and is looking for something that will actually get them to where they want to go of a healed world. A frustrated one. Yes. Most people should be frustrated at this point. So I would like for half of us to sort of hold in our heads one of those heroes and half the other. So are there who here would like to kind of be the representative? Maybe just raise your hand, but hopefully about half of you.
Going to have a break first, maybe.
You want to have a break before we do that?
Yeah,
okay.
Coffee break.
So you can think about it? Okay, that's cool. So coffee break. When we come back, I want you guys to think about who you want to represent, whether it's the citizen or the CSO change maker. What we're going to do is we're going to see how that person sees the world as the world is broken, sees those old stories as not working, and that's how we tap into the zeitgeist. So if nobody believes anymore in that old story of growth, that's a great place to come up with a new story. But if something else is really the focus, that's where we want to start focusing our new stories. We'll start talking about that.
Sorry, is the change agent is the mentor?
No, sorry. We're going to have two heroes for this story because we want to communicate to these two audiences. So change agent. The mentor is going to be this brand that we're creating, the Great Transition brand. Change agent as well as citizen.
I'm sorry, I understood quite well the citizen story, but could you please repeat the change agent?
Yeah, so we have this change agent. What we're hoping for with what we build here is to rally lots and lots of people working in CSOs to want to participate in connecting their campaigns to the Great Transition. So there are audience members out there, thousands of them, who are doing development work, who are doing environmental work, who are doing all kinds of work, who don't yet see their work connected to something larger, but they're frustrated because they're not getting the ground they want to. We want to reach out to them and say, hey, join us in this creation of the Great Transition. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah, great, thanks. So we're going to do that. We're going to see how the world is broken to those people. Then we're going to write a letter from their perspective to a loved one, so that we can really dive into who they are. And we're going to share some of those letters about how their world is broken. So we can really get out of thinking about our offering and ourselves and start thinking about our audiences. From there, we'll talk about what values those audiences are trying to live out that we can help them connect more deeply to with what we're saying. We'll explore our unique voice as mentors through the archetype work we do. Figure out what we can offer them that actually makes this journey possible and what core truth we want to teach at the end of all that. This will give us our map. We'll probably come up with two to be like kind of two working models to compare. And then we'll actually at the end create some actual stories, some campaign stories that we could potentially deploy or start using to show what these brands might bring forth. So that's what we're going to be here to do. I think all of these things will leave plenty of containers for talking about what the Great Transition is, what it looks like, what the future looks like. But we'll go kind of systematically through these different steps to show what the broken world looks like all the way to what the healed world looks like and what we learn from that journey.